This is episode 9 called Spelling It Out. What you'll see us doing in this episode is we'll just be taking what we've got of the spell class at the moment and taking it even further so we can make as many spells as we want, as opposed to just having the one spell like we have at the moment. What you see me doing a moment ago is creating a constructor so that we can actually create as many spells as we want nice and easily without having to create a different class for each spell. What you see me doing now is trying to create a fireball spell, and this is just to test that the spells are working correctly so that we can have multiple spells as opposed to just having the one. As you see there, I've got a little icon for the fireball, and this is what I'm trying to load, and as you can see there on the action bar, it is loaded fully and it's working properly with the energy cost being the right amount and the experience increase being the right amount. Now I've been thinking a little bit, and I'm thinking the experience may keep increasing as you use spells as a nice little change from the traditional role-playing game type. What you see me doing now is just adding into the cast function of these spells, adding an add particle function. Now what this will do is it'll add a specific particle to the game. Now what this could be is it could be the fireball that we'll be casting from the actual fireball spell, or it could be any other thing, say an arrow or some sparks, even if it's just that sort of spell. And you see me using dir as a variable. Now what dir will be is it'll just be a words either saying left, right, up or down, and this will just tell it which way it has to fire the particle. What you see me doing now is just trying to create a function for get X position in the player's class. So what we're going to be doing is just trying to create this function to get the X position and the Y position. The reason we'll be doing this is it will make it a little bit easier so that we can just use functions that call these positions rather than adding them as parameters to the function. Obviously once I've got the X positions set up, it's really easy to do the Y position. It's just cut, paste and then change the X to the Y. What you see me doing now is just messing around to make it public, and the reason I try and make it public is because I need the current direction when I cast a spell, and this makes it a little bit easier for me rather than having to include that and then making another function. I can just make it public as I'm the only one changing it, so I'm not going to mess around with it. See me creating another class here called particle. Now as I said earlier, this will either be the fireball or it could be any other thing that I choose to add later in the game. I just shorten all the functions there just so they're a little easier to navigate, and as I'm working at the top of the class and the bottom of the class rather than group scrolling up and down between it all, I can just shorten all the functions down so I can read them both at once. What you see me doing here is just setting up the particle class. Obviously I've got a constructor there and I've got some variables, and I'll just be changing them as I build the class up more and more and more. Now particles are a main part of the game because obviously when you cast a spell you need some sort of visual representation that you've actually cast it, and that's what the particles will be by creating the fireball, the flames, anything that you actually cast. As long as they've got a visual representation that they've happened, it doesn't matter how they're done really. What you see here is me just making a quick rotate function. Now why the reasons this is so that I can just create one image for the tile and just rotate it to fit whatever direction it has to travel in. Other than that, the only other way to do this would be to create 4 images, one pointing up, one pointing right, one pointing down and one pointing left of every single item that I want to create. So every fireball, every arrow, I'd have to create 4 of them. Using this rotate function, I don't actually have to do that. I can just do it with creating one image and then just rotating it in the code. So this makes it a little easier and quicker for me. Now the code in here is just a little bit of maths, figuring out when I'm going to need to read see this actually takes me quite a while to figure out. Now I am planning to do some tutorials soon, and this is one of the things I will definitely cover, and so I'll just go more in depth on what the maths is, how all the different functions work that I'm using here. What you see me doing here is just setting up a Y V and an X V. The reason I do this is because if I didn't do this, then I could have it that I'd only have one velocity, and then that way I wouldn't know which direction it is. And so I use an X V and a Y V, so that depending on which direction I want to shoot the particle depends on what the X velocity is and what the Y velocity is. Okay, the life variable that you see me just put in there is just another way of saying time. The particle isn't going to live forever, it isn't going to be able to shoot a fireball and it just burns and flies forever. So what will happen is when you cast it, life will be put to, I don't know, say 3 seconds, which in this terms is actually 180 ticks, and every tick it will reduce the life by 1, and when it's less than 0 it will return false, and that will remove it from the handler that I'll be creating soon. Obviously the print function here is one you've seen many times, and all I do is just set it up in exactly the same way to print the position of the particle, and then obviously print the particle in place. Now part tile is the tile that the particle will be using. Like for example, when you cast the fireball, it will be the picture of the actual fireball that flies along the screen. Now the tile creation function is one that you've seen many times as well, and as you see there, particle is being passed to add particle in our game class, and we have a function now that I'll be creating soon, a class, that is called particle handler. Now what this will do is this will allow an easier and more combined way of me controlling the particles. So everything that I have to do to a particle, rather than having to do it to an array list of particles, I can just cast it onto this class and let this class deal with it. This is a little easier as well, because it means I know if there's a problem with the particles, I only have to look in particle handler and particle, I don't have to go looking through the game and everything else. Now as you see there, we're doing if not particles.getI.tick. Now the reason I'm doing that is because if the particle's tick function returns false, which is obviously the not there, then it means that the particle's life has timed out, and that will mean that we have to remove the particle from the array list, and therefore that's why we're doing it the way we are. And what you see me doing here is just adding the particle handler to the tick function so that it ticks, and adding it to the render function so that it renders. It didn't actually work, I don't know if you see there, but it wasn't working. So we go back to the way that we've always worked before, using the system out function that we like to use. And as you see, it's not printing, which is wrong, which means that there's something wrong in the level above it. And as you see now, it is printing in the when we print the entity class, and it's printing after the validate chunk, but for some reason it's not printing in the players class. Now I flick around a bit to try and figure out what it is, and I figure out it's because I'm not passing it the correct variables, therefore it's not identifying the correct functions. What you see me doing here is just creating the rotation to try and edit it a little bit so that we can use it in a slightly different way to how we was before, because the way we was doing it before was slightly ineffective, so I try and do it a different way now. The way that we do it is we just render the image rotated, and then we print that to the screen. The reason we do this is because it's just a little bit easier when it comes down to it. When you look at it on the base level, it looks a little bit easier and a little bit nicer, so it does a little bit less coding and a little bit quicker when it runs. Now, as you see, we keep getting debugging errors, and what these mean is that there's something that wouldn't stop the game in future, but it might cause it to go slightly wrong. So you simply don't know, just trying to work out where it is, because for some reason Eclipse won't tell me where it is that it's doing it, so I just have to try and comment some stuff out and try and get it working again. This is always the best way with troubleshooting, because you know that you've implemented something new, so you try and remove the thing that you've implemented as you know it was working perfectly before then. And I find out there, I'm not sure if you realised, but I find out that it's actually when creating the particle that it goes wrong. And then I use that just there quickly just to find out that it's actually the tile that's going wrong. Next I want to see what about the tile it is, and it turns out it's the rotation function. And so I try and remove the rotation function and just try and see if I can figure out where it is that it's going wrong. As you see, it's still going wrong just by removing that loop there, so I have to just quickly remove some of this and try and figure out if I can narrow it down so that it works again, and then I'll build it from the ground up again. So I've just removed it from the image class and taken it into the tile class to try and see if it's just a little placing error that will make it a little bit better if it's over there. I mean, it turns out it works, so I go down and uncomment everything else, and as you see, it sort of works. Not really, not perfectly, but the point is that it's drawing the tiles on the screen, and that is proof of concept that it will work, and that we're sort of heading in the right direction. See, just by making the level X's minus, you'll see that they're actually radiating now from the player, as opposed to where before it was radiating from a point somewhere else on the map. It's actually now, depending on where the player is, it will shoot it from the player's position. What you see me do now is just edit in the rotation function once again, and the reason I'm doing this is because I'm creating it so that the rotation doesn't affect the original image, it just affects a new image that it creates, and it'll be only used at the time. Now, the reason this will work better is because I won't have to figure out how it was rotated last time and then try and rotate it accordingly, whereas if you shoot it up, for example, and you want to shoot it down, you don't have to figure out first that it's been pointed up, because you'll know that the image is always pointed left, and you just rotate it when you need it. As you see, obviously, it's still leaving trails wherever it goes, and because the player's rendering a chunk around him, it's not rendering within that chunk. Now, I'll solve that in a moment, but up until this moment, I just want to try and stop it from leaving the trails, which is what you see me creating here, using the invalidate chunk function that we created when we created the player. And so, you see me just messing around, and it'd been a long time since I'd programmed this, so I just have to check what each of the functions do correctly, like knowing what the last parameter means, knowing whether it's in blocks or actual pixels. Turns out it's in actual pixels as opposed to blocks, and this makes it a little bit easier on me because it means I don't have to render a whole block if I don't want to. try messing around with the variables where I'm rotating the image, and you see now it's sort of printing every now and again, but it's still not printing within the square surrounding the player. So that's why I have to try and create and get it doing properly before I can really progress from this. What you see me doing there is just duplicating the invalidate chunk. And the reason I do this is just so that it draws over the new one, as opposed the old one, sorry, as opposed to the new one. And you see it there, it's working near enough perfectly, except still not drawing in the square. So I'll have to try and solve that, but that will be done in a second. So what I'm doing here is just creating a get x and a get y function within the particle class, and this is just as the same reason it's been before, so that I can get the x and y position of the particle from outside of the class. Okay, that's episode 9 of Programming with Matt. Thank you for tuning in, and please check back next Sunday when we'll be doing a little bit more of our game. Thank you.